Welcome, everybody, to the Dad's Doomsday Guide. Today, we are pleased to have back Forensic Psychologists Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott, co-hosts of the podcast LA Not So Confidential. Thanks for coming back on, you guys. I really appreciate it.
Sure thing.
You.
Yeah, we're happy to be back to talk about, some more terrifying things.
Yeah. I wanted to
keep everybody on edge.
Yeah.
Just keep everybody on edge.
This is the podcast that makes people feel at ease.
Right. Yeah. As if there's not enough going on in the world.
Yeah. I wanted to say, though, before we begin, to everybody that while we're covering the subject of internet predators, Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott, they just did a recent 3-part series on this very subject. So if you want to learn more and really take a deep dive into this, I highly recommend you head over to their podcast and check it out. It's extremely interesting. I finished part 1. I still have to listen to part 2 and part 3, but I was fascinated when I started the first part. So everybody definitely check it out.
It's dense.
Yeah. I mean,
I get in small bites.
Well, it's funny because when I emailed you guys and I was like, oh, hey, maybe we can touch upon some other things. I did that. And then I listened to the part 1 and I was like, oh, we won't have time for really anything else.
Well, last time we were here with you, we were prepping for this and we had our outline and we were like, holy crap, like we need to split this up because it is so much. And it's the realm that Scott and I worked in when we first met, when we did our first internship together. And then I went on to do this work for, a decade. So there's a lot. And I think we have a lot to say about it, obviously, just with anecdotal and firsthand experience.
Yeah. And so I guess a first question, maybe to start it off, would be, I think you guys called it on your podcast, internet facilitated sexual offenses. Now, is that a general term for what exactly are we talking about when we start getting into internet predators and child pornography and all this different stuff?
Yeah, there's different things, people call it. I try to be a little bit more formal and professional with it instead of just saying like online sex crimes. I mean, vernacular, yeah, that's what we're talking about. Anything that has to do with the internet. And where people are using a computer or the internet to facilitate those offenses. Now, they may lead to making contact and meeting up in real life. So it doesn't totally cut out some of the contact offenses or in real life sexual offenses that occur. But generally, it's starting on the internet. And that is problematic for a bunch of reasons, especially with when the internet became very popular and widespread and wasn't just a luxury for, a few rich people to have, then it was like this, how does law enforcement keep up with technology? What is the jurisdiction?
It became something completely different from what previously existed before the access to the internet and the ubiquitous use of families and younger children. If someone was going to engage in these behaviors, they had to find victims or seek out victims in a completely different manner, right? So you got to keep your terms, and you're like Shiloh was saying, the police are constantly having to evolve in order to keep up with the technology and the social media platforms and the ways that these predators have access to children.
And without jumping, I'm sure we'll probably jump back and forth on this stuff. Now, when someone says child pornography, is that what's most pervasive on this? Or, I mean, because when I was listening to what you guys talking about, I touched upon how is this stuff being generated? There seems like there's such a saturation of it and there's so much of it. Where is it all coming from? I mean, is it sex trafficking? Is it from other countries? Is it the US? Is it parents? I mean, when you talk about law enforcement and how they're trying to keep tabs on this stuff, like where do you even start?
Yeah, it's everything that you named. It's all of the above. So I would say out of all of the internet facilitated sex crimes, child pornography is probably the most pervasive because if you think about it, it's kind of the easiest offense to commit rather than reaching out and speaking to a child online, that solicitation piece or voyeurism or exhibitionism online. Somebody can sit back and access child pornography pretty darn easily. And under the title of child pornography, you can have a distributor, you can have a producer, or somebody who is simply in possession of it. So you even have these subcategories of child pornography. And Scott and I, the term in the field that we work in is child sexual abuse images.
Mm-hmm.
And even though legally, like in the penal code, it will say child pornography, but really to keep in your head that this is not a product, that this is not, some illegal product that we're talking about being shipped back and forth. This is child sexual abuse that occurred, that there is now a product because of that. So it's not wanting to water it down and just labeling it as a thing when it really is this horrific abuse documented.
It's shifting the focus to where the focus needs to be. And the focus is that the outcome is the product that's distributed. However, it starts with a crime. And, just by even, it's hard for me because the term wasn't really used so clearly when I was still completely in that environment when Shiloh and I met. But now it's important for us to differentiate between the two so that we can really focus is like, because it waters it, like Shiloh was saying, it waters it down by calling it pornography. It's easy. It's like saying child prostitution. There is no such thing as child prostitution. There is, it's an illegal act, and it's molestation and abuse and sexual trafficking of a child.
And what ages typically are we looking at when it comes to child pornography? I mean, I'm sure it's across the board, but is there one that seems to be more prevalent than the other?
Well, it is. So generally here in the United States, when we talk about child pornography charges, they're looking at images anything below 18, right? So we might have different ages of consent in different states in the United States, which majority of the states are actually 16 and 17. But anything under the age of 18, and the majority of it is going to be adolescents. So that window, 13 to 17 years old. So it's still illegal, but we're talking about images depicting post-pubescent children. So children that are adolescents and teens who have developed secondary sex characteristics. But everything else is going to be prepubescent. That's how we kind of divvy it up when we're looking at categories. And it's really important treatment-wise and from an assessment perspective as a psychologist of what does this person have possession of? What are they looking at? What are they interested? What are they into? And then maybe that helps inform our diagnosis of them. Because if it's anything prepubescent, that might start to get my mind going towards, okay, this person might be more pedophilic than not, because a pedophile is only going to be interested in prepubescent children.
Okay.
So there is a trend to where the demand, if you will, is for younger and younger children and for more explicit types of images. But the majority is going to be the easiest type that's out there. And you asked earlier where it comes from. I mean, a teenage girl could be taking pictures of herself and putting it somewhere, and then it gets out into the universe, right? The internet universe. So this could be coming from Eastern Europe. It could be coming from, someone who's abusing a child. It could be coming from a child who themselves doesn't have the wherewithal to know what they're putting out there and what it's being used for.
Do they break that? Is that ever been broken down in studies in terms of where it's coming from, or if it's if willing, someone just does it and it accidentally gets out versus somebody who's like been like abducted or sex trafficking and they're being forced to do these types of things, or families?
I'm sure the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children does a lot of that research. I don't know what the breakdown is on that, but they are sort of the main hub that takes in all of the identified images, a lot to help identify victims. So they have the biggest database of that, and I think it would be hard to tell in a lot of images, but others you could probably.
Yeah, I was gonna say the information probably it's not even really there to know where these are coming from and under what circumstances these are being created, unless something has obvious, coming from one place more often than not. But now, do these perpetrators across the spectrum? I mean, I remember you guys mentioning that, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that under like physical abuse in person, that tends to be overwhelmingly men, and then the women perpetrators tended to go after post-pubescent boys, if that was correct, versus younger. And do those same kind of stats or profiles blend across into the internet realm, or is it kind of a different wilderness?
I never treated a female offender for possession of child pornography.
Wow.
So not that it doesn't happen, of course. But yeah, overwhelmingly contact offenses are committed by men. I don't have numbers on this, but I would say even more overwhelmingly, the online sexual offenses are generated by males as well.
Gosh, darn guys. I mean, what's going on? What is going on psychologically where that's a thing? Why? I mean, maybe we touched upon this last time, but why is it? Has it ever been pinned down about why men are so capable of doing this kind of thing or having these thoughts?
That's a great question. I'm trying to think what are the couple ways that I could break this down?
Well,
go ahead.
While you're doing, I mean, the easiest, I'll start with the easiest and I'll leave the hardest part for Dr. Shiloh. But the easiest thing is to remember that there is a biological imperative in the way humans are designed for reproduction. And we are designed for reproduction to notice secondary sexual characteristics in males and females. And secondary sexual characteristics are sort of the beginning of breast buds and pubic hair. You know, it's when the hormones just basically start dropping in the body and causing all of these body changes. Well, when that happens to a younger individual, it is completely, now let me be very clear with how we say this. I know we did it in our episodes, but it is completely within the realm of normalcy for an adult male, even a young adult male, to be attracted to someone that is in their teens, who is starting to present with secondary sexual characteristics. That is a biological imperative. So the attraction is normal. It's not legal. But across the world, we have a lot of different cultural aspects to it. A lot of cultures look at it very differently. Even within the United States, we have some movements where, there are some parts of our society in the U.S. that believe that marrying as young as 13 is completely okay. It's not attempting to engage a individual under legal age in sexual activity, even though it's appropriate to be sexually attracted to them, is illegal. Mm-hmm. And culturally, it's inappropriate too. It's not just that it's illegal; it's we don't do that. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like it's part of what we beyond the fact that it's a biological imperative. We also have a social contract that's reflected in our characterological makeup that we agree that this is what's right for our society, that we allow children to be children and we don't engage them for survival purposes in the process of sexual activity. Does that make sense? Like you engaged younger children in the past because it was a biological imperative to keep the tribe alive.
Yeah.
Right. But we don't need to do that.
Yeah.
And we need to, that's why as a good parent, you let your kids be kids as much as they can be kids. Right. And you hope that there's not a predator out there trying to take advantage of them when they're 13, 14, 15, or 16. So that's the easy answer to that part of it. But there's another part.
Answer, but I think let's just talk globally about criminal behavior, right? Majority of people who break the law are men, overwhelmingly from women, right? So if we kind of take this view from way far back and say, okay, let's start there. And then when you're looking at lack of empathy and some of the risk factors that are present with sex offenders, specifically criminals who are sex offenders, they tend to be some traits that are more common in men than in women. And so you're sort of layering, criminal behavior with sexual behavior. If we just look at women, even adults, right? There's not as many female sex offenders offending against adults. They're not running around raping people. And I know people will have a whole well, you can't, but you can, and it happens.
It does.
It does happen. But the numbers are lower. So I think it's looking at all of those different things, the criminality differences between men and women, and then sexual acting out between men and women, it's just lower. And then if we kind of drill down to what Scott is saying, there are way more men that find there are way more heterosexual men that find younger women more attractive because of this biological imperative. Because when we if we flip that around and we look at adult heterosexual women, they generally aren't attracted to adolescent boys. Because if we're looking at this like survival of the tribe, piece that's inside of us, that scrawny little boy is not going to keep me alive and keep my family, protected from the saber-tooth tiger or whatever.
He's not going to be out there hunting the mastodon and bringing home the food.
So it is, and Scott's 100% right. If we were to, and there are ways that we can sort of test people's sexual interest with a machine called the penile plethysmograph. If we were to hook up every heterosexual man to that and show them sexually suggestive images of teenage girls, you would be attracted to that, and that's fine. You just can't touch. and it's normal, and that I think that people think that they're getting asked a trick question a lot of times. But if she's post-pubescent, you are hardwired to be attracted to that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just be respectful. And obviously, and depending what state you're in, what country you're in, you can't act.
So someone came to you and was like, hey, hypothetical situation here. Someone came to you and was like, hey, I'm attracted to so-and-so. What age or what, is it just post-pubescent is when you're like, okay, if it's before that, that's a warning sign in terms of a heterosexual male being attracted to, if you're doing tests on someone to find out if they're a threat?
Yeah, there's a whole lot we look at when we look at assessment, and obviously diagnosing we want to take very seriously because that's a label you can put on somebody and it's going to follow them forever. So it would be a number of different things. When Scott and I would do psychological assessments with individuals getting out of prison and coming back into the community and then receiving treatment, they would get an assessment done first. And we sit down, we do probably a 2 to 3 hour clinical interview with them. So gaining all of their background history, but in that is a sexual history as well. So ask them about their sexual development. Who and when did they start becoming attracted to certain individuals? And then there was some testing that went on with that. Sometimes with the high-risk people, we were doing the penile plethysmograph. We didn't do it personally. We sent them off to another center where they got that done. There's some other computer-generated tests that can measure for sexual interest, and as well as taking into account what offense they had been arrested for. So we would get the police reports and all the court reports to comb through to see, what kind of pornography were they looking at and masturbating to. And we put all those puzzle pieces together to really formulate our diagnosis. Are they pedophilic or not? And you can be a non-exclusive pedophile, meaning you are attracted to prepubescent children, but you're also attracted to post-pubescent individuals. So they can be attracted to adults too.
There's general, yeah. I mean, and there are these sort of categories that have somewhat diffuse boundaries between them. So we use one of the terms that's tossed around a lot clearly is pedophile, but we also look at, especially in terms of what Shiloh and I are talking about right now, the term hebophile. And hebophile would mean that someone is attracted to what we're talking about as a normal attraction. So there's a subset. We're talking about heterosexual men being attracted to post-pubescent girls, but if they're exclusively attracted to post-pubescent girls and not beyond that, then that's another part of the puzzle piece that we look at. And it's and all children develop at different rates, but generally with hebephilia, we're talking about between age 11 and 14. And one of the things that's coming up in the studies is that there's a lot of research that it's not only, especially for exclusive hebephilias, it's not just about the sexual characteristics, but it's also about the emotional and intellectual stage of development that the child is in. So again, it ain't right. It's not, you don't touch.
Yeah.
Part of it is part of the attraction is appropriate, and part of it is completely inappropriate and illegal. Don't touch.
Now, when you look at, I'm assuming the way you keep track of this stuff, it's kind of hard because I know there's VPN, you can hide IP addresses. You really don't know where stuff's coming from or who's necessarily downloading it. Now, is there any way to tell how many people are accessing this stuff that is clearly illegal and, is a result of someone being sex trafficked or, abused or whatever else? Is it a high number, low number? I'm sure.
I was shown the number of IP addresses in the United States that had accessed some sort of child pornography. Probably, I don't know, 7 years ago or so. I don't remember the number, but it was astronomical. It was, I think, in the 500,000.
Oh my God.
Range, like of just separate IP addresses. Now, does that mean they accessed one picture of a 17-year-old topless? Maybe, so it could be something sort of on that like cusp end, a barely legal end, that wouldn't be deviant clinically, all the way down on to, it could have been a younger child or something really horrific or sadistic. So I remember when I saw the number, I was just blown away because it was in the hundreds of thousands. I don't know. I'm sure it's higher now, but that's more investigative side. I haven't kept up with that too much.
And is there?
It's interesting. I mean, there is research that's done from that, and that's like if you look at even the data that comes from large legal adult pornography sites such as Pornhub, they've given their data out. They give it out freely, which is pretty cool because there's a lot of data there, and it's looking at like what the most specific areas of interest in adult porn are in the US. And like in across the Bible Belt, there's a huge intersection between interest in lesbian porn and transsexual porn.
Oh, how weird.
It's these things that supposedly, like the Bible Belt, supposedly would not be into at all.
Very taboo.
Right? They're dark secrets.
Which is really funny because the Pacific Northwest, according to Pornhub, really loves stepmom porn, which I just think is really hilarious. And then you go a couple of steps over that just like, the sort of North Dakotas, Wyomings, and they're all into stepsister. And it's like, what? How? How is this a thing?
I didn't know that.
They put out a report every single year. It's really interesting data. There's a couple statisticians that did a whole book on just crunching numbers of adult pornography use, and it was fascinating. And for years and years and years, the top search term was some derivative of young or teen. And so, that's really interesting as a researcher and a treating clinician to go, well, the majority of people are searching for something kind of on that like cusp. Yeah. What's going on? Like, what is the interest here? But like anyway.
Tennessee is really huge with cartoon porn and anime. Like, what is going on with Tennessee? I mean, I'm from Alabama, but I could say at least, it's like I don't.
What is it in Alabama?
Right in Alabama right now, the top search is lesbian porn.
Oh, okay. So. Yeah, that has replaced young and teen as the most searched for derivative is lesbian. So I don't know. Things are changing for some reason.
Yeah. And how are these? For the illegal pornography, how are these being accessed? Because you always hear the word dark web being thrown around. I don't know if you guys have any working knowledge of that, but how exactly is that being disseminated, and why is it so difficult for authorities to necessarily shut those things down when they start noticing this stuff being trafficked through?
I think to answer the last part of your question, just as soon as they shut one down, another one pops up. So websites, can be thrown up just about by anyone now. So it really is this game of like cat and mouse with that. The dark web and different shared software, I don't even know what to call it. I'm not as into like this techie stuff, but software in which you can share files and stuff like that on, in sort of a cloud system is what a lot of individuals were using. And there is this aspect to it that is very trader game competitive to where there will be series of images of the same victim, for example, and where people will try to get each image in that series.
They treat it like trading cards?
Totally. And, some are really hard to get.
So that's hitting on a different aspect of the character and personality makeup. I mean, or, that's hitting on the collector, almost what we would call like sort of a part of the OCD spectrum or anxiety spectrum. If like there's a little bit of relief, a little bit of a dopamine flush in the system of like, I've got the entire Helen series.
That's so weird. That's so crazy.
Right.
You don't think that that's how this all works, like it's being treated so cavalier.
It really is, and that's sort of where what we're interested in is looking at how the mind gets so distorted to get to a place where there's zero victim empathy, where this is being treated like a product, and like it's not, just because I'm sitting behind my computer trading an image with someone across the world, I'm not doing anything wrong. I didn't hurt anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And it really speaks to the psychology of how and why this is so pervasive. I mean, it's really disturbing how pervasive it is.
I was going to ask if, Scott, if you had a chance to listen to the podcast Warhead.
No, not yet.
Okay. It's a very well produced podcast. I recommend it for anyone that's into true crime, in particular, sort of understanding what we're talking about today, where it talks about these two perpetrators who had one of the largest networks on the dark web, and they were trading in hundreds of thousands of images and making a lot of money off of it from people all over the world. And it's one of those situations where Shiloh was talking about, sort of, it's almost like the old Greek myth of the Hydra. You cut the one head off the Hydra and another 7 heads emerge. And we find out in the course of this particular investigation of them going after this producer and distributor of child sex abuse images that, how do I put it? There were so many agencies from around the world that were trying to get this guy, and they had to actively participate in some of the distribution of those images in order to go undercover. Jeez. So I think that there's a lot more understanding of the dark web among investigating agencies than certainly I know. I don't, that's just not a place I go into. It's not anything that I know, I understand the basics of it, but that's where all this is happening. I mean, if you remember, Silk Road was up a few years ago, and Silk Road was basically a dark web distributor of drugs. You could buy literally anything by mail order. And they had to take several years in order to set up the investigation, in order to get the correct evidence to take this down, because it crossed so many international jurisdictional lines. So there may be a generator, there may be somebody in Middle America that's generating this type of image and these types of videos, but they may have bought a server in Australia or a server in the Ukraine, so that they're kind of covering their path all over the world. And there's some very smart, very, very ill individuals who are carrying on this type of activity.
And is most of that, does the U.S. do a good job of trying to, I guess, not allow these producers of the content to be inside this country? Or is it just as bad here as it is, in some other third world country where it's just like, they're reaping the benefits from this stuff? Is there any way to tell? Because I feel like it's almost like, maybe it's a bad analogy, but like the drug war. It's like you're going after people using, and then you're not getting the people that are necessarily like the kingpins, all that are pushing all this stuff. Yeah,
right.
So
yeah, it's definitely easier to produce and supply from other parts of the world. Just if you look at laws, if you look at culture. Socioeconomic status of the country, in the cyber, there's a whole subsection of internet facilitated crimes called cyber sexual tourism, where there are parts of the world, like the Philippines is big in this, where men here in the United States will log on and they interact with a child via webcam in the Philippines who is they and their family are getting paid to essentially pimp out their child online. I mean, that's the most blunt way I can put it, to where these families are desperate for some sort of income. And this is a very simple, easy way that unfortunately some families are in on this, and or, the children are being made to do this by other people, other adults.
I can't even wrap my head around that one. Is that more common than you would hope it wasn't? Or
yeah. There's a so our third episode on this series is that the third one we did? Was on,
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, was on that stuff. But there was a I think it was a company out of the Netherlands who set up this really cool CGI little Philippine girl. And what they did, I mean, people, with the second they put her up as like available online to interact in this way, I mean, within minutes, there was person after person logging on, and they actually captured the, IP addresses of, 75,000 men that they then turned over to the authorities. Like, it was insane numbers, just insane.
Are these guys logging in? Are they like 21 to 25 or 30 to 40, or like, is there any?
It is all over the place. I mean,
SES, all like, we're talking about attorneys, CEOs, down to day laborers. I mean, it's across the entire spectrum of the population.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, the internet is not a luxury anymore, so you have to talk about access. First of all, everybody has access. You have access right in your pocket with your phone. But also there is no distinction across all of those lines of who's offending more. So it is across the board. And I've worked with offenders who have been arrested for child pornography, possession and distribution, where, they started looking at this when they were 9, because they're of the age of the internet, and they were looking at actual like age mates at that time. To them, like seeing a 10 or 11-year-old wasn't weird when they were 9, 10, and 11, except that it's sexual material they shouldn't be looking at. But as they grow older, they continue to engage in this, but they just had access so much easier. So, I mean, for your audience, talking about like having some sort of lockdown and rules and engagement with your kids when it comes to the easy accessibility of everything on the internet right now, it's not a joke. I mean,
Yeah. Well, what are the odds because when I was a kid, like AOL was a big deal, chat rooms, and you were like always warned, like, you don't know who you're talking to, don't give out any personal information. And the list goes on, with common sense stuff that a parent would tell. But I guess it's kind of a two-parter. What are the odds that your son or daughter will come across someone, if they're active on the internet, that is trying to do this kind of stuff? I know it'll maybe differentiate between someone who's just trying to maybe gain images, or actually someone who's trying to meet in person. Is it like 1 in 20, 1 in 10? I mean, what?
I have a stat for you.
Oh,
I found
it.
So 1 in 25 children ages 10 to 17 receive an online sexual solicitation in which offline contact was attempted.
Whoa.
So 1 in 25.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's and
think about how often, everybody's online, and right now predators know that kids are on Zoom and at home, stuck there bored and living on the internet right now.
Yeah. And
so, yeah.
Is that, if you were to kind of break it down in terms of, because I know the number's probably much higher from just people, I can get away with it, I'm going to go look at child porn on the internet, no one's going to catch me. I mean, I feel like that's taking what used to be probably maybe a child molester, but was too scared to do it in person, never did it. Whereas now they have another avenue to do it, and hands off, I'm not going to get caught, or it's not as bad, or whatever else they're justifying it.
That's a really interesting realm to all this.
Yeah, it's. I thought it was bad, but I never thought it was like getting this bad.
We have the sort of the term, and I'm getting it wrong, Shiloh. It's not virtuous pedophile, is it? Is it?
Yeah, it is.
Is it the virtuous pedophile?
Yeah.
So, there is a subsection of the population that recognizes that they have these desires, recognizes that they are inappropriate, seeks out some kind of support, or looks online for a way to get treatment or support. So that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're talking about a really murky area that's problematic and inhabited by people that maybe there's enough of a little tinge of narcissism or entitlement that they can then make the justification of, I'm not doing any contact.
Mm-hmm.
I will never touch anyone, but I'll allow myself to look at this online.
Mm-hmm.
So it just gets more complex the more we know about this and the more that we seek to address it in the community. It's not a black and white issue. And that's one of the things that makes it difficult, is that we try and keep up with, we wish that states and other legal entities would try and keep up with what's appropriate so that we're not catching all the people in the same net and treating them the same way, because that doesn't help anybody. There are some, we shouldn't be putting sexually violent predators in the same net as someone who stumbled across 3 images and accidentally downloaded them. And actually that does happen. Now, that's not like the most prevalent example, but it does happen. And those people can get caught up in the net as well as the people that are on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah. I mean, how does the law courts differentiate and kind of like use their judgment and kind of, hey, this person doesn't have a history of this. This was obviously what they were doing. I mean, or are these people getting kind of screwed along with the ones who are actually doing the violent or the more sadistic?
So a lot of internet-based offenses are handled by the feds. So the federal rules and guidelines to sentencing are pretty archaic and they're pretty rigid. So and things are changing for the better because the research is now coming out, of course, and judges can and do take some consideration. But like with the federal system, there are federal sentencing guidelines. So if you get caught, and this is the problem that we see with drug offenses, right? And why, it's at that level, people can have such a small amount of drugs and be sentenced for decades. Same with child pornography. So it really stems from when it wasn't as easy to get child pornography, where you actually had to, like, through the U.S. Postal Service, get your child porn from Russia or whatever.
Yeah.
And, if you do anything through the Postal Service, like, you're screwed, right?
Yeah.
Like the feds are going to hammer you. And so a lot of the child pornography charges federally do carry decades-long sentences with them. And so the example that Scott gave, where someone may not truly be someone that I would diagnose with pedophilia, maybe, they were a little curious, maybe they kind of went down this rabbit hole of like some taboo stuff. But after sitting down with them and really doing what I told you, like we do in an assessment, they're not pedophilic, they're not going to go out and hurt a child. They might be looking at 20 years in prison for these 3 images.
Wow.
So it is, it's complicated. It's very frustrating, especially as clinicians. But we do know from research that of people who get caught with child pornography, 50%, half of them meet the criteria for pedophilic disorder. Wow. So it's half and half. And that's what, we used to do, is who when they cross our, path, even though that would be usually after their sentence is when we would see them.
Okay.
So, but there probably is some sort of psychological assessment being done beforehand as well to contribute to sentencing.
Yeah. And then when you talk about 1 in 25 kids will come across someone, is there grooming involved like there would be in real life, or is this kind of a different tack that they take via online?
No, there is, the grooming really mirrors what we talked about with grooming in your last episode in real life, but it starts pretty innocently. Right now it's probably going to be through some sort of like social media DMs or something like that, where it used to be probably an AOL chat room. And so it may even not be in DMs. It might just be like going back and forth and kind of building a rapport with the child, but gaining information, getting to know them through their social media, which is a wealth of knowledge. You don't even have to ask them questions pretty much anymore. What are you into? Do you hate your parents today? You know, that sort of thing. And it builds. There's a couple of different routes that we see. Some, and these can be like your To Catch a Predator type people, right? We call them solicitation offenders. So they're making contact online first, but the intent is to meet up for some sort of sexual encounter. Some will just not spend a lot of time building rapport and will just be like, boom, like hit them with some sexual question or term and see how the kid reacts. If the kid like flips out, then they'll just be like, okay, on to the next, until they get someone who doesn't react adversely. But some will build a lot of rapport and spend a lot of time gaining the trust of the child. So we see both. It just kind of depends on the offender.
Are they hiding their identities through this, or they would be treating it like they would if you saw me face to face? Hey, I'm a 40-year-old guy, or am I pretending to be like a 13-year-old girl because you're a 12-year-old boy? And I'm going to talk to you and get you to go meet me, and then I'm going to trick you. Is there that element to it, or not so much?
I've seen all of the above. Usually, if they're really pretending to be someone they're clearly not, it's for like. They're not really going to take it offline. They want sexual talk to happen, maybe get some pictures sent to them, like that sort of thing,
Gotcha.
or using a webcam. If they are going to meet up in real life, it's not really like that gotcha, like, oh, I said I was a 13-year-old girl, but here I am. It is, hey, maybe I'm much younger than, I'm telling you I am, but when you meet up, are you going to question that after you've already sort of built this rapport with me and lied to your parents about where you're going, and now you're at a hotel room with me, and it's total grooming and it's horrific. But yeah, it's all over the board.
It's interesting because many times what a predator is doing by looking at all of the available data that comes up in someone's social media is they are building a profile themselves. They're building a profile of what they are identifying as the characteristics that will make this person more likely. Like, are they more likely to post explicit pictures, or is someone posting about how much they hate their parents? And then, there's a hook to get in. Sounds like your mom's a total B. Mine is too. Like there's ways of sort of finding their hook. And what we also find out is that it's not just one person at a time that the predators are going after. They may be simultaneously chatting with multiple minors, just to see, because there's always the chance that one of the hooks, the bait, is not going to work. So they lose that one. They still got 6 other chats going on over here.
Jeez. And is there sites or apps that people are finding that are frequented by these people more often than not, or is it can be, like you said, Zoom? I don't know. Like I know they were having a problem with people like hacking into the chats with like disturbing images, like big boardroom meetings. But I mean, is there like a technical savvy that these people that are using to get into, to weasel their way into like private chats or things? Or are they still more like Instagram, Facebook? They're just random, I'm going to hit this person up and see if they talk to me.
It's wherever the kids are. So, whatever age group is using that platform, that's where they're going to go, wherever they're interested in. So if it's teens that are, using Instagram and TikTok more often, maybe that's where they're doing it. Snapchat was really popular because you could send things and then it would disappear, So it's wherever the widest pool of possible victims are. But I think this is probably like the parent's worst nightmare. Like, we hear it on the news, girl runs away and then they look at her laptop and how long has she been talking to this guy, and ends up, in some other state.
It's crazy.
And it's like, she's a teen, like 14. Like, how do you even do that?
My initial thought is like, oh, this it would be black and white. You say, hey, there's creeps online. There's people are going to be trying to do this stuff. Don't talk to anybody. Don't meet up with anybody. Boom, done. My kid's not going to do it. Do you find that to be effective, or is there just so many other little elements and creative ways that these people are using to get in with your kids that it's not?
Let me answer that with a question. How successful are you in getting your kids to turn the lights off when they leave a room?
Just getting harder and harder.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really part of it. I mean, part of the responsibilities of, or the journey of becoming an adult is a process of individuation and differentiation from the family. And that's healthy. You know, in order for you to become a fully realized, emotionally stable adult, you do have to disentangle yourself from some relationships in family that were necessarily enmeshed when you were young, and now it's a time to grow up and step away and be your own person. And that's not an overnight off and on switch. That is a gradual process where a child learns to do that. And so a child is going to push back against their parents, and they are going to assert boundaries, and they should, even if it results in conflict between the parent and the child. The problem is how do we get adults? Because look, we're talking about a really icky subject, and the responsibility, and I'm not a parent. Shiloh is a parent. You're a parent. But, the reality is, like, we like to think that we're great people because we sit down and we have talks with our kids. But the reality is that the majority of parents do not sit down and talk to their children in an adult fashion that treats them as a burgeoning adult rather than shaking a finger at them. So to sit down and go, don't ever talk to anybody on the internet. They're not going to hear that. If you sit down with a child, even as a young child that's like 8 or 9 years old, and sit down and go, that there are good people in the world and there are bad people in the world. And sometimes bad people pretend to be good people. And that's why I really need you to be careful when you're on Facebook, or I really need you to be careful when you're on Instagram. So if anybody ever starts asking you personal questions, you know that you're not supposed to talk to them. So even if you notice the tone, sort of the gentle way I'm talking that's reassuring but shows concern, that's not something a lot of parents know how to do. And we all need to learn how to do that and have this is a difficult and complex world that children are growing up in, and it requires difficult and complex and challenging conversations.
And it needs to start early and be ongoing. It's not just the one-time thing. So
I was going to say, what age do you guys find appropriate to bring this kind of, I know there's you obviously want to kind of shade it as they get older and get more and more maybe detailed about the threats that are out there. But first it's just don't talk to strangers. But where do you feel like it's like the conversation Dr. Scott was referring to around 8 or 9? I
think when it becomes relevant.
Okay.
So before you and I jumped on recording, you and I were talking about making sure our kids weren't around so we could actually record. And I literally had the conversation that Scott was just performing for us so beautifully with my daughter, who's 8, probably 2 months ago, because all of her friends are using Roblox. And she wanted to desperately use it. And all I've heard is terrible stuff about it. I jump online, I'm like, what should I know about this? But I had to do my own research. So I think that's the responsibility of a parent. I went online, looked at the research. I looked at how I could protect her settings wise. I reached out to other parents that I trust and I, think they have good judgment. I'm like, hey, what do you think? Here's what I've heard. And then that was how I formulated to sit down and talk with her about it, because it is something that I'm allowing her to do, but it has to be done responsibly. But it's not all on her. She has to know, there, like Scott was saying, there are bad people out there. Here's what to look for, and here's what to do. You make it simple for them. I'm keeping it real simple for her right now. If they say something along these lines or anything that makes you uncomfortable, you don't even have to say anything back. You can just shut that iPad.
Yeah.
Just close it and get out. And so little tangible bites like that, and then continuously checking in is, you just keep the conversation going with whatever platform she's going to grow with and into. And I think ignorance of I just don't know what that newfangled thing is, then, you're
That's
kind of choosing
mistake.
your own path. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you guys see, if you had to put a number on it, the threat of this kind of thing being greater or less than actual in-person physical abuse or grooming from someone in their life, relatives or whatever it is, or if you're looking at, obviously it depends on the kid's usage, but if the kid's online, like most kids are in social media, which one do you feel like the greater odds are that they'll be contacted in this way?
I don't know. That's a really great question. I've never even thought of. I'm going to go with, just off the top of my head, but I would think the online stuff would be something that I would look out for. Not that I'm not looking out for the other, but I don't know. Maybe it's in this time of quarantine too. I'm like, how many actual people are we around right now? I don't know. Scott, what are your thoughts on that?
I feel the same way. But immediately as you were asking that, Scott, I went back to the idea that, that online predator who's running 6 to 10 chats simultaneously in order to get, like, there's more, the odds are you're going to hit the jackpot in doing that than you are in specifically grooming for a contact meeting. But that's a great question. And then, like, if we can find, I think that's fascinating. Like, if we could find stats on that, if there is any, I think that's important. But bringing it back to your initial point and question is that parents just need to be involved, and not, it's a delicate balance. You can't be over involved. In my private practice, I've dealt with adult clients who tell stories like, as a therapist and as clinicians, especially doing the breadth of work that Dr. Shiloh and I do, we hear like a lot of terrible things. Life is pain. There's no escaping that, and we all have baggage and we all have family experiences that on the outside look, everything's great. And on the reverse side, we all know that it's really, that they're challenging. Everybody has some version of that. But as therapists, we hear really the worst of the worst. And I've got, like an example, and I'm de-identifying everything so that there's no identification. But, I had a young adult, very successful individual who had a hovering mother since the age of 8. And I mean on them all the time, following them in a car when they were at the playground, tracking them on their cell phone. And this individual is a wonderful individual and a wonderful client and so high functioning that I'm almost sitting on the other side of the room, my chin on the floor going, how are you so functioning given this harridan you grew up with? And the fact that there was like a father who let it all happen and didn't protect him or her from it. So it all comes back. I really think that parenting is such an essential part of this, and it reflects some of the problems we have in our culture here in the West, is that we're a Puritan country, no matter what you say. We were settled by Puritans. We have very puritanical views of sex. We don't really overall have the healthiest view of sex. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. And I won't go into it because seriously, I respect what everybody's beliefs is, but you can believe something that's not necessarily true. And one of the things is if you don't have these difficult conversations with your child, you're just kicking problems down the road that's going to keep me in business as a therapist and a lot of other therapists in business. And I would love to be able to go out of business. I would love that there's such great parenting in the world that we don't have to deal with these kind of things anymore.
And so do you see a lot of damage? You guys see a lot of damage being done in that sense, whether it's kind of hover parenting or it's you're not having these conversations and you're allowing perverse views of what, sex is and everything, they're kind of destroying their relationships down the road? Or
that's really the one. That's a little afield of what our today's topic is, but it really is one of the things. If you don't teach your kids about healthy sexual relationships, they end up, having, and they end up with somebody that also is not taught that lesson. Then you've got two adults fumbling through one of the most gratifying and satisfying and intimate parts of a relationship, but there's shame attached or all this other baggage that comes with it.
Or they are getting victimized or become victimizers because the boundaries, they just don't know what is right, what isn't. So, I mean, that's hard, like kind of like we laughed and was like, dude, what's up with all these guys? Like with these offenses, I think that's and maybe we touched on this last time in the last episode, but it's kind of scary if you were raising boys to say, like, how do I raise my child to not be a perpetrator?
Yeah.
Whereas, parents of girls, it's like, okay, I'm going to raise my girl not to be a victim. And that's the way we have to think.
Yeah. I've actually had that specific thought seeing my son now too, because, they start getting a little tantrumy. They start like hitting stuff. And it's just like, you start thinking like, hey, what's this about? What are you doing that for? So, I mean, it's like walking a line between like treating to, respect women, obviously how I treat my wife is gonna, he's gonna see that, and that'll probably impact him greatly. Yeah,
that's it. Modeling is so important, and modeling the way you show affection and intimacy and respect for each other as adults. I mean, that's laying a fantastic foundation for your kids.
Yeah. Well, and before we get close to wrapping it up here, now I had this thought popped in my head. We talk about kids being victimized online. Now, how common is it for an adult, for like a dating app or people appearing who they're not online? Is that an issue as well? Or is kind of a lot of these predatory behaviors kind of stop around, 16, 17, and now you're getting in obviously to different maybe psychological makeups, but is that something that I guess especially women need to be aware of in terms of like when they go online and they start interacting with people? Is that a problem or no?
The things that come to mind for me that adults should be aware of is one, sort of like adult bullying, which can come into a lot of different forms. So it could be sort of like this bleed over of, toxic domestic violence type relationships that can bleed over like psychological abuse through online stuff. But I also think about like catfishing and people being taken in these romance scams for lots of money. And that is really big, and men and women, it's huge. So those are the two areas I kind of think of. What about you, Scott?
I mean, those are the two major ones. I think that the ones that I mean, following up on that particular example, I know an individual, a guy a little bit younger than me, who, was a former, like a retired blue collar worker who has been a victim of a scam for about 10 years now. And he believes that this Russian model is going to move to his little town in Alabama and marry him. And he's given her a great deal of money. And I know this individual, and I have taken him by the shoulders and I've said, this is not going to happen. And, he's fully into the belief. So I just wanted to add that, like, there's always going to be victims for people like that, because they themselves are so much in need of some sort of intimacy or validation. And that's what makes adults victims. Shiloh and I have been guests now twice on a podcast that's produced out of Hong Kong by an Australian friend of ours, Jules Hannaford. And she has one that has gotten a lot of awards called Fool Me Twice. And she was a victim of a romance scam. And it's a fascinating journey because you see that balance of what we do as adults. And if we're struggling with it as adults, kids are struggling with it of, oh, this person has said they're this and they're not quite this, but they seem nice, or, oh, I don't want to rock the boat and I'm kind of lonely, and another factor and another factor and another factor. And that's just a recipe for disaster. So tying it all back around, is like, you just always need to be aware of what's your motivation for being online. You want to meet somebody and you want to give them a chance, but be an informed consumer of dating apps. Really know how to drag their profile picture into Google reverse images.
Right.
Like that's not such a hard thing for us because I'm an early adopter of computer tech, even though I'm older. And I have peers that are my age that don't know how to do that. And I'm going, no, don't give them your phone number. Don't go check and see if this is real.
Don't give them your social security number.
Yeah. It's interesting. And I think the reason that pops in my head is just, I guess, the vulnerability that the internet kind of creates for people. And like, it's almost like they don't view it as real. It's like, it's like almost like a fantasy world where magical things can happen for me, whether it's a kid or an adult. And it's funny because like you look back when I was a kid and, my grandma would be getting phone calls from people trying to scam her out of money. Like, oh, I'm such and such in this place and send me money. And now it seems to all the same thing. It's just the stories have transferred to become more modern to affect people on the internet and like a whole nother. And some of it actually is verbatim. Like I'm a doctor in this country and I need money.
Right.
But it's
the same script.
Yeah.
They're reading from.
And it's just scary that, kids are being, if you're not, like you guys say, in front of it, letting them know kind of the insane, it's almost bringing like the dangers of the world on a silver platter to them at their fingertips that you can find.
Well, and here's where I unfortunately have my paranoia, my functional paranoia slipping in and a little bit of sort of that leads into conspiracy theory, but more just functional paranoia is everybody needs to wake up and be aware that this technology, I mean, look, this is fantastic. Where are you again? Where are you physically located? What part of the world?
Los Angeles.
Oh, you're in LA. Okay. Yeah. So you're in one part of LA. I'm in another part of LA. Shiloh is in another part of Southern California that's just, a handful of miles away. Mm-hmm. But look at this technology. Look at what we're able to do today, come together and share this information and create something. Mm-hmm. That's freaking phenomenal, right? It's amazing. But along with these rapid advances in technology, we have other things like deep fakes. And when deep fakes are getting more and more convincing, and Snapchat
Explain
filters.
What that is.
Scott, are you familiar with a deep fake?
I think I know what you're talking about, but go ahead and explain it to me.
Okay, so deep faking basically is an artificial intelligence programs that currently exist that started off in movies. And like, we're talking like about 15, 16, 17 years ago, when, interestingly enough, it all started when action figures for big release movies like superhero movies and fantasy movies started making action figures, because we now have the technology to do these ultra high definition 3D photographs, mm-hmm. which then can be replicated for sculpturing. Well, that imagery was then co-opted by a number of actors and actresses that are like, because they went out and they sold it and they said, hey, Jane Smith, you are the hottest commodity in ingenue 26-year-old actresses right now. We can map your face and body, and you'll be able to use this template for your movies for the next 25 years.
Wow.
Because we can use this template and we can always keep you this age and this body shape, right? So that never really took off in the way that we were expecting, but we've been doing things like we see like in X-Men when they de-age Dr. X. Mm-hmm. It's a really good effect. Yeah. They did a really good job on that. But now we have deep fakes where they can facially map, and even TikTok has a version of this where you can insert your face into Lord of the Rings, mm-hmm. or your face into John Wick, mm-hmm. or your face into Die Hard. And the technology is getting better and better. And that's really scary, because you're not going to know if what you're looking at is actually real.
Yeah.
Snapchat filters are coming along in a way where you can change your eye color. And the only way you can tell it's wrong is if you move too quick, mm-hmm. and the filter can't keep up. Mm-hmm.
And here we are plastering our faces all over YouTube right now.
I know.
Everybody take them. Please download.
Keep this microphone right in front of my face.
Yeah. And anybody out there, if you do it, take this quarantine 19 off my face, because I'm like just getting fatter and fatter.
Well, really with the technology, any crime is going to move with that technology. I mean, that in our lifetimes, and, I just realized today I graduated from the police academy 18 years ago today. And I'm like, I just think of like the technology and how things have gone. But, you know, violent crime has been down in recent years because of, instead of robbing a bank, you can be the Nigerian prince that scams somebody through technology. So, you know, almost any crime that can be done online or done in the real world can be done online with less risk to the perpetrator. So that's all we're seeing here. You know, the possession of child pornography, the voyeurism, exhibitionism, the solicitation, that's all stuff people don't have to necessarily do in real life anymore and still get some of those needs met. So, you know, I think it's really interesting to just look across the board at criminal behavior. It's all being utilized with technology.
So you guys,
and one of the things that we'll notice about any new technology is, like, you look at the development of the photograph in the late 1800s, and as soon as, you know, it was being developed in France, it was being developed almost simultaneously in England and then in the US, because the zeitgeist supported the development of that technology. And immediately somebody was out there making porn.
Right.
They were immediately like, yep, lift up your bloomers and your petticoats.
Ankle porn.
And so, but in all seriousness, that's one of the things that we find. Any new development of a technology, somebody is going to, like virtual reality. There's a whole virtual reality channel on Pornhub, I've heard.
Right.
So in other words, you guys don't see this stopping. Obviously, it'll just keep accelerating, and it's going to be up to law enforcement to try to come up with ways to weed out the illegal stuff. And that sounds, from our conversation, like kind of a losing battle.
Because they're always playing catch up.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, there's secondary change. You know, primary change is putting a Band-Aid on a bleeding head wound. You know, but if you do secondary sociological change and environmental and structural change, then you can have an impact. So, like, let's say that there's a third world country that's a huge producer of child porn. If there was a concerted effort to get to those places that are dirt poor and doing it because they're producing this, the parents are pimping their children out because they're dirt poor. Let's get some other economy in there. Then there is no need for it. Right. I mean, so it's a reflection also of the need, like some of the most really, I mean, it's all disgusting, but some of the most saddest examples here in the US of the generation of child sexual abuse images has been around drug addicts. Like, you know, every time it's always some drug addicted parent who's so strung out on meth or heroin or both that they're going to pimp out their child in order to keep their habit up.
Yeah. This is, it's
complex.
It's complex. It's overwhelming. It's just like, you listen to it and you're just like, well, if you even wanted to do something about it, where do you start? I mean, it's just like, man, and there's so many branches and prongs that need to be like attacked to even make a dent.
Yeah. And I think awareness is another one. I mean, you talking about this topic, you know, how much have we seen like human trafficking awareness and prevention campaigns? You know, it's not something that we're unaware of anymore. And we need to continue to do that because these types of offenses live in secrecy in all realms, whether it's the perpetrator trying to keep it secret, the victim doesn't want to come forward because of shame and no one's talking about it or won't believe them, or as a society, we don't want to hear about it. So let's pretend like it's not happening. We need to bring awareness and realize it's happening. And so people don't feel so comfortable doing it in the shadows anymore.
Yeah. Well, I guess any last thoughts in terms of what parents should know? I mean, we kind of covered it in terms of just make sure you know what you're doing. Do you guys recommend what, I don't know, I haven't had to use it yet, but any kind of monitoring of what sites they're on or locks them out of things? I'm assuming once they get to be like, you know, a teenager, they're not going to want their phone sites locked anymore. But have you guys come across any tech or anything that you would recommend as far as parents check it out?
I'm not quite there yet either. I think that's a very personal parental choice of how much privacy you're giving your child for all the reasons Scott spoke about when they're trying to, you know, differentiate themselves and have that and showing a trust in your child too. There's a ton of stuff out there. And I know that if they have their own devices, parents can have an app on their phone that basically mirrors everything and you can see everything that's going on. So it's out there. If that is your style, look into it. I don't have anything specific that I would recommend and or say don't use. Mm-hmm. I again, like just the awareness, talking to kids about sex so the internet doesn't teach them about sex, I think is the biggest thing, because it's if you're not telling them about it or what they might see isn't what it's like in the real world, then they might get their modeling and how men should treat women from some online source. And I don't think that's what people want.
No. One of the things that's interesting about what Shiloh is saying is that so many kids especially some of the younger males that are interviewed about their exposure to really hardcore pornography when they're a child, like they stumble upon it themselves, like through their desktop or iPad or whatever. And they're usually grossed out by it. Mm-hmm. Like it's just like overwhelming and gross because it's not fitting their developmental period. And, that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. That's a good thing for them to realize, like, oh, this is gross. And the reason they probably think that way is because they've had conversations with their parents or they have an understanding. So once again, just emphasizing, communicate appropriate with your child. Don't put it off. One of the things we want to do is as parents is we just want to deny, because you don't want to think about your child ever being in danger or being in that position, right? Mm-hmm. But by not thinking about it, you're creating the environment for a lot of things to fall into place where your child could be victimized. Mm-hmm. So have those difficult conversations.
Well, I want to thank you guys again. I really do appreciate you coming on. And if anybody wants to know more, you guys have anything coming up? I know you guys are doing kind of the live streaming for podcasting. Do you have anything coming up that everybody should be aware of?
Nothing really huge. We drop episodes every other Wednesday. And the Saturday following our episode drop, we do a live stream on Get Vocal. So we have guests, or we do a deeper dive into the topic, or just, whatever sort of thing is out there.
Or just chat with some of our listeners. We'll jump on and it's super fun. We're really enjoying it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that's where you can find us.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, guys. And I hope everybody found it useful, could put some of these things to good use. I was going to say, I have a friend actually who, a friend of a friend who said he put a GPS basically on his kid, and his kid's still like a baby. He's like, I don't know what he's thinking, but he's losing it. I think maybe if he's abducted or something, he'll know where he's going. But
you know what? Direct him to that episode of Black Mirror called Archangel.
Oh,
if you're familiar with the Archangel, that should be like, that'll put any parent in the position of like really considering what kind of actions they take for tracking their kid.
All right. Okay, everybody, you got it. Watch Black Mirror, Archangel. All right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Sure.
You're welcome. Take care.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Dad's Doomsday Guide.
So enlightening. I loved it.
Get more episodes and videos at themadmachinists.com.
Superb.
Oh, hell yeah.